Namaskar and welcome to the Center for Soft Power's global webinar series, Soft Talk 7, Indian Art and Literature in the UK. The Center for Soft Power is India's first center that is dedicated to the study of Indian soft power. The Center for Soft Power specifically focuses on the analysis, advocacy, and awareness in the field of India's cultural heritage globally. The center maps the various elements of India's culture, including yoga, performing arts, Ayurveda, cinema, cuisine, craft, design, visual art, language, literature, spirituality, experiential tourism, sports, Indic knowledge systems, education, and of course, I already mentioned our performing arts by engaging with practitioners and academicians. I welcome and thank Shri Amish Tripathi, Director of the Nehru Center in London, a columnist and author, along with Shri Sandeep Virdi, Director of the iconic Darbar Festival of Indian Music and Dance in the UK, and Shri Hari Nair. Shri Amish Tripathi is a well-known author, especially for his Shiva and Ramchandra trilogies. In 2017, he launched his first non-fiction book, Immortal India. Shri Tripathi's books have sold over 5 million copies in the Indian subcontinent since 2010. Shri Sandeep Virdi, in an interview with Aparna Sridhar for the Economic Times, says, "There are things that traditional organizers ignore at their own peril. The feel and touch of the marketing materials, the choice of venues for performances, the production values of the performances, staging, lighting, and vitally, the sound of the music all go a long way in making an evening special. He has presented Indian music and dance to great acclaim and popularity." They will be in conversation with Sri Hari Nair, an entrepreneur, management consultant, travel talk show host, radio show host, and an eternal student now pursuing a deep study of our ancient civilization. At the outset, I'd like to thank all of them for being so kind and so spontaneously agreeing to being on this webinar. And I also thank the audience and of course our technical team. Over to you, Sri Hari Nair.
Good evening and thanks a lot, Vijayalakshmi ji. Good evening, Amish, or rather good afternoon to you and Sandeep. And of course, good evening to the entire audience that's watching this live in India. You know, it obviously does not require any introduction on my part for either of you. So I will jump straight in to sort of, the subject at hand, right, and the questions. Let me sort of, before we get into the subject, which is really about how arts and literature have sort of happened, Indian arts and literature have happened in the UK and are happening in the future. Sort of turn attention a little bit to the craft that both of you sort of are involved in, right? So that we set a little bit of background. So the question I have is this: given the fact that both of you look at literature for Amish and music for Sandeep from a very Indian wellspring, right? It's all coming from Indian stuff. And you're promoting or sort of taking that, conveying that to Indian audiences and global audiences. When you have that, in my mind, there are a couple of questions. One, how do you sort of transport the essential Indianness? You know, one is the content, but one is the there is that Indianness. How do you sort of transport that, through your writing and through the events that you conduct is one question. The other is, what does that mean when you, sort of communicate to Indians on one side and when you communicate to foreigners on the other side? So, just trying to understand the way the craft plays out for both of you. So Amish, maybe we can start with you. How does it play out for you across these two dimensions?
I'm very happy to answer, but Sandeep is more senior. I think he should go first. But Sandeep, if you want to start, otherwise I'm happy to.
You can start.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Very kind. Hari, essentially the question is, how do we bring our Indianness into our craft? And I think this is defined by what we think Indianness is. Is Indianness our language? Because in that sense, all of us are speaking in a language that is not Indian. Is Indianness our food? Is it our dance? Is it our music? Is it our literature? Um, I like to think Indianness is something deeper. It is the values that we hold dear. Um, India is the only pre-Bronze Age culture that is a living culture today. Every other pre-Bronze Age culture has been wiped out. Most of them violently, but they've all been wiped out. We are the only ones still alive. We are the only ones which still chants prayers that our ancestors chanted maybe 6,000, 7,000 years ago. We Shaivites still chant Sri Rudram to this day. Vaishnavas still chant Purushokta to this day. We still have rituals and practices that go back deep into the past, right? But we're not the kind of culture which says my way or the highway, that everyone has to convert into our way. We are like the massive Ganga Ji, and rivers can come and join and keep their identity, but are a part of the Ganga Ji, as well. New cultures emerge from India and become a part. Cultures come from abroad and get Indianized. So I won't just restrict my thoughts to Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, which are the dharmic religions which have emerged from India, but also the way Islam and Christianity are practiced in India is significantly different from how they're practiced in the other world. So then that brings to the point that India is essentially about certain values that we hold dear, right? And I think most of us Indians, we can debate it, we can evaluate it, that that what are those values, but most of us Indians just instinctively know this is Indian, this is not. So most of us Indians, even if we don't know the Sanskrit line Ati Sarvatra Varjayit, we instinctively stay away from. And what does Ati Sarvatra Varjayit mean? Excess of anything, extremes of anything should be avoided. It's not good. Our divinity has always been about balance, right? So even if we don't know that Sanskrit line, most Indians instinctively come to that point of view, right? So Indians will never have this concept of my God is the true God, your God is the false God, you will go to hell for not coming to my temple. For most of us Indians, it's what a bizarre. No, of course not. You worship your God, I'll worship my God. I'll respect your God, you respect my God or goddess, right? For most of us Indians, it's instinctively. And then this reflects in the way we write our stories, in the music that we celebrate, in the dances that we celebrate. Only an Indian could have written, "Ya to masjid mein sharab peene de saki, ya aisi jagah bata jahan khuda na ho." Right? Only an Indian Muslim could have written something so beautiful, right? I think that value then defines the way we express our stories, those values. Then it comes to how do we communicate to foreigners, right? Because most of us Indians, we instinctively know, we don't even have to explain things, right? Like in an Indian movie, if there's a person who's dying, and a diya goes off, and somewhere else a diya is lit, you don't need to explain. An Indian just knows the soul has been reborn there. You don't even need to explain, right? A foreigner will say, "Abhi kya ho raha hai?" Right? So when one has to communicate these stories to foreigners, you have to explain fundamental concepts. Like, for example, for them to explain the concept that we don't have the concept of false gods, right? That to respect my God, to worship my God, I have to hate someone else's God or goddess is ridiculous to us Indians. But to many foreigners, it's actually a new concept, right? So then when we explain our stories, we often have to explain the context as well, so they can understand what's going on. Like, they can get very shocked by how we speak to our divine, to our gods and goddesses. They might find it disrespectful. We don't find it disrespectful. It's a way we speak to our, it's a loving relationship. There can be love, there can be fear, there can be, so those things then have to be, the fundamental concepts have to be explained to foreigners for them to get our stories. Those are my thoughts.
Got it. No, that's very interesting. So that's so. Let me move the same question in a sense, Sandeep, to you, because you have the I would say the sort of double challenge. One of sort of obviously talking to a large number of people who are outside of India, because your home conversation really is in the UK, and the fact that music has a sort of in a sense a grammar of its own, a language of its own, which Indian classical music, which itself then becomes one more step for somebody to cross to understand what's going on. So, so how does that play out in your craft?
It's a very good question, and Amish has sort of explained the Indianness really well. What I would say is that I'll make it a little bit more personal. I was born in Kenya, so I joke that I was made in Kenya, made in Africa. So I came from Africa and then settled here in the UK. And then what I realized was that my grandparents and their parents, my great-grandparents, they came from India, and then they came to Kenya, and then they held on to their values, which is what Amish was talking about. Because when you're a migrant or an immigrant coming in, you try and hold on to your values, your systems of what you know. And so all the Indians in Africa kind of stuck together, kept their roots together in terms of their mother language, the food, the cultural practices of weddings and everything, and then your spiritual side in terms of going to the mandir, the gurdwara. And what was unique in Africa was that you lived in complexes where you had like a middle portion, which was open, and then you would have Muslims, Sikhs, Hindus, everyone living together. And no matter what, whose special day it was, you all kind of mixed in, and you thought, right, they're celebrating Eid, we've got Vaisakhi, or you've got Diwali. So it was already mixed, and then kids were walking around, and then, you know, the elders from the different communities would look after you and make sure that they kept an eye out. Today, we live in a very different world. So when we came into the UK, the first concert that I know of on a major scale was that of Uday Shankar, Ravi Shankar's brother, and that was at the South Bank Centre in 1956. So that kind of gives you an idea of when big arts was brought into the UK. And then since then, what's happened is you've had a number of individuals who took it upon themselves to pay for arts out of their pockets. So we had Kanti Shah and Yogesh Singh, who kind of from 1971 to 1991, quite a long period of 20 years, promoted all the arts and culture, because again, they came from Africa to the UK, or people came from India to the UK, wherever they came from, they were really trying to hold on to their roots. And classical form, like Amish says, goes back thousands of years, is one of the most evolved art forms that we have. And that was one way of, you know, trying to, you had to build your own ecosystem, because the only other ecosystem that existed was Western classical music, or you had rock and pop. And then, I mean, Indian cinema became a very big thing. So in Southall, where predominantly a lot of people, Asians, settled in Leicester, a lot of big cinemas were set up. And then, you know, there would be the Bollywood shows, and then be the getting ready on the Sunday, putting on your saris and your clothing and going and celebrating that. But across the 70s and 80s, Kanti Shah and a couple of other people did a lot of work. And then in 1977, Jay Viswadev set up Summer Arts, and that was quite significant because he turned it into sort of a mainstream thing, took it into the really high quality venues that we have in London, and he brought in the great masters, Ustad Vlad Khan, Ali Akbar Khan Sahib, all the masters, and then the next generation after them. And they had also a number of individuals like Jagdeep Shah, who did very small scale batiks, but they were really important because batiks has kind of the original essence of our music, and kind of what Darbar does, I guess now, is big halls, a lot of technical stuff going on. So there's something nice about the original stuff. And it was actually in 1989 that the Asian Music Circuit was formed, and that was funded quite heavily in the UK by the Arts Council of England. And this is really significant, that the difference between the UK and India is that you've got significant support from the Arts Council of England, which is funded by the DCMS, which is a government body. supporting arts and culture in the UK. And they have a 10-year framework of what they have to see where arts is going to go. And I try and explain this because this is really significant. If you've got a big body that's got a plan for your arts, dance, music, literature, everything, where do you want to be in 10 years? We then fit into that part. And then after that, at the same time, around the country, wherever the Asians had sort of settled, whether it was Leicester, Birmingham, Manchester, small organizations formed to celebrate Indian classical arts, whether it's dance, literature, or music. So those were quite important. And then today, we have 10 what we call national portfolio organizations, and Darbar is one of them. We're now geographically located, and everyone sort of specializes in their own thing. Some specialize in dance, some specialize in other forms. But this whole thing about Indianness is like Amish said, that you have your faith, you have your identity. It's like an onion, you just keep on peeling the layers away, but ultimately, at the bottom, you'll find the human form, the human element that binds us all together. But it's very important that we articulate here in the West what is special about our tradition, that we have everything that was codified in the Bharatanatyam, the Shastras, in hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And although we have an oral tradition, and this is probably a slight difficulty, I wouldn't say it's a problem, because the West have an amazing ability to write down history. So as and when wars are going on, someone's documenting it. Someone's painting those war scenes. When we had wars, it was just a matter of survival. Forget about documentation. So documentation in an intellectualized form doesn't exist. So that whole thing about Mozart writing all his paperwork and then saying, here it is, this is my body of work, that intellectuals can formulate. We don't have that. We just have a genius called Ustad Vlad Khan or Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahib, and that's it. There's nothing apart from people who've interviewed him. There isn't anything. So this thing about clinging onto your heritage, your belonging, and then now it's been exacerbated in the last couple of weeks through what's been happening in the US with Floyd. And that's brought up the whole issue about racism and where we stand. And we should never forget that if you are an English person going abroad, you are given a special status. Otherwise, if we go out, we're still called immigrants. Yeah, you're not called an expat. Yeah.
That's
if
right.
an English person goes to India, he's an expat, and then he's given all this special treatment. If I go anywhere else, right, me or Amish go anywhere, we're immigrants. So I think that has to be really understood, and those are the difficult challenges that we face.
Right.
And just to finish this point off that you've brought, one of the difficulties we've had is the West will pigeonhole you how they want you to be. So for example, in record labels, especially, they would categorize everything. And then unfortunately, what happened with that categorization is Indian classical music got dropped into the world music pot. And we have fought very hard with all the artistic directors of all the top venues and said to them that, look, we are an art form that goes back thousands of years. We have intellectual framework. It's just as complex as anything else. We need to be in the Western classical music pot. So that has been a big battle, but we finally succeeded a number of years ago, and then we were put into the Western classical thing. So the challenge is about what you're talking about, being Indian and Indianness is quite complex, and you have to keep on fighting your corner and just reminding people that this is who we are, this is what we bring to the culture of Great Britain.
That's wonderful, actually. This is fascinating. So as I listen to you and I listen to Amit, so here's what I'm sort of, if I can sort of summarize or paraphrase, is really that one, of course, is that there was a wonderful sort of sweep of history of how it happened, and I think the interesting stories of how Indians came not just from India but from around and other parts of the world and sort of it all came together in the UK is an extremely interesting Indianness in itself, and it's fascinating just to see that as one strand of Indianness. But and there is obviously a sweep of history that's happened over a number of years now. And I think the interesting point you're making is that in being able to operate to talk to an audience outside India, as Amish said and you said, is that you've got to peel many layers of possibly preconception that something might not exist in their scheme of things, for example, or that they would want to pigeonhole you in a particular manner, but you see yourself in a different way, and therefore you've got to sort of fight for our corner, so to speak, as you say. So it's a bunch of different things, and there is no one thing that sort of is there to do, but there's a bunch of things, and obviously, therefore, kudos to all the people who've been at it for some time, because clearly it's a tough thing to do. Which also allows me to sort of quickly segue into sort of the next part, which is, that was the history. And this is the craft. Given that is the history and this is the craft, where are we today? Would you say that we are in a good place? Would you say that there are big challenges? Would you say that there's something more that needs to be done? Would you like to just give me a quick summary, and to the audience a quick summary of where you think the whole sort of enterprise of taking Indian music to England and to the UK is?
Amish, would you like to answer that, or?
No, Indian music in the UK. That's your area, Sandeep, completely.
Okay. So,
but I'll step in after you on how writing can be. Please.
That's right. Yeah.
I would say that there are some significant challenges on where we are with Indian classical music because of the kind of the funding. So what happened was, it's a generational thing as well. The first generation that came in, they very much were about holding on to what they brought from India or from Africa through that period. So they were holding on to the Indian classical music structure. So in the 70s and 80s, if you did a big concert, you would get a big turnout of Indians coming there. Today, when we do the Darbar Festival, I would say probably we have almost 50-50 audience of Asians, non-Asians. Sometimes it's even more non-Asians than Asians. And one of the things that we've had to work very hard at is that we've actually stopped advertising to our Indian audiences. And the reason we've done that is we find that if you put on a Bollywood show, that Bollywood show will sell out very quickly. And if you try and do a classical show, no matter how much you kind of knock on people's doors, you cannot get them to buy the tickets. What we've realized is that we just want to represent our art form and market it to a much wider audience and work with world-class venues who appreciate where our art form is. So somehow, it's probably a strong statement to say that we get more valued by the Western classical venues than we do perhaps from our own communities. Our communities are very strong in terms of the mandirs, the gurdwaras, and the Bollywood scene. So in terms of the arts, it's hugely challenging. And like I said earlier, those people who did run small-scale arts organizations, what I've noticed is that there must have been 20 plus 25 organizations. Now that's really decreased, and then we've only got 10. With the whole scenario with COVID today, I mean, I would say that our income has dramatically fallen. We are now in what we call an emergency planning year, just to make sure that we survive the year and then come out of it that we are still okay. There will be casualties in this situation where a number of arts organizations will fold, and it's very, very difficult. The scenario for UK-based artists, and I know that the scenario for India is terrible because there is no support mechanism for them. So the current situation right now where we stand, I think it's going to be really challenging for the next 5 years. But what's been interesting is that we no longer market to our own audiences that actually this is a global product. And the way I think about it is yoga no longer belongs to India. And the reason it doesn't belong to India anymore is that the West has taken hold of it, modified it, and whether you agree with it or not agree with it, they have really reinterpreted it. And the other example I give it is that we have kind of dahi, right? When we have our meals. So we can have plain dahi, we can have plain yogurt, we can have bundi yogurt, we can have raita, we can have that. That's about it. When the West got hold of it, they've done so much. So now if you go into a shopping center, you'll go and see yogurt, but you'll see about 40, 50 varieties of it with all sorts of fruits and everything. So it's the same sort of thing. The West have got hold of yoga and done so much with it. Question is that the dangers are that if we don't take care of our own tradition, you will find, well, it's not a problem, but you will find that more and more the West will grab hold of it because they appreciate what it brings. The holistic nature of what Amish was talking about is so vital in terms of our yoga system, the chakra system, the food structure that we have through Ayurveda and all of that. But we seem to be just jumping on the Western bandwagon when everyone else is trying to go back to our Indianness and say, can we have a bit of that Indianness?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's, and looking at it from this part of the world, when you're sitting inside India and looking at it, it's equally fascinating to see that there's, all the kids around us are all sort of, doing exactly what you said, which is really fascinated by all of that that's coming from outside. Let me ask the same thing to Amish, but with a little bit of a difference, Amish. One, of course, is, how does this play out for literature? Where are we on literature, and what do you see as the opportunity and the challenges for literature? But I want to broaden that out a little bit, given the fact that you now sort of head up Nehru Center and therefore have a much broader remit to achieve. So how do you see the broader range of taking culture, Indian culture there to the UK? Where are we? What's likely to happen, and what challenges, if any? Amish.
Let me address this at two levels. One is what the tide of history itself can do. Secondly, the things that are in our control. One of the realities of life, seeing the Indian experience in the first millennium common era, I had written an article on this for the Global Soft Power Summit, that we were the soft power superpower in the first millennium. More than half the world's population had accepted our culture without us conquering them. Southeast Asia, China had absorbed, Southeast Asia had absorbed, Shaivite and Hindu culture. I'm talking about the first millennium. China, Japan, Central Asia absorbed Buddhism. This is more than 50% of the world's population. They had absorbed Indian names, Indian dance styles, everything. So it was and what was this based on? Part was, of course, our brilliant scientific and cultural achievements at that time. But part was also we had hard power. In the last 1,000 years, second millennium common era, कोई भी राह चलता आके हमको conquer कर रहा था. We were being invaded repeatedly. When the first millennium, no one could conquer us. We used to beat back every invader. The Huns who destroyed much of Europe and the Arab world and Persia were beaten back in India by Skandagupta. So, as you have hard power is not a I think it's a necessary condition for soft power. It's not a sufficient condition. So the Mongols had hard power, but it never converted into soft power. But there is almost no culture which has no hard power, which will also have soft power. So first you need hard power. If you're not able to defend yourself, you don't have economic power, then frankly your culture means very little. India is now a $3 trillion economy. We're a bigger economy than the UK, and the gap will only increase because even post COVID. Right. So as our hard power increases, our soft power will naturally, tide of history, it will naturally increase. There's a reason why so many Westerners are more interested in India in the last 10 years. If you saw a series like Friends, you would have no Indian character. But a series like A Big Bang Theory, which came 10 years later, has a very important Indian character. Right. 10 years later, it will be even more pronounced. Bodyguard, for example, a big BBC series out here, had many Indian characters, and I don't know if you noticed subtly, all the Indian characters were the good guys, right? They weren't causing trouble. They were doing good. They were on the side of the law, right? I don't know if you noticed that. Right? So that is one aspect. Just the tide of history. If we can keep our hard power growing, it will grow. Soft power will also grow. The second thing is what can we do, right? Ourselves consciously. I agree with Sandeep completely that we must attract the native British. One of the things that and I've been here just a few months, right? And unfortunately, half that tenure is in this bizarre pandemic, more than half. But one of the things I was told in my briefing in Delhi, which I came out here and I realized it's true, Nehru Center has a wonderful heritage. But if one has to be brutally frank, and this is what was told to me, that we are more of a ghetto than a cultural outpost. We are speaking only to ourselves. Most of our audiences are Indians, and that too the elderly among the Indians. Our programming bent is such that we attract that kind of audience. We don't attract the second, third generation. We certainly don't attract that much of the native British, except for a few who are British Raj era aficionados. Okay.
Sure.
So programming has to change. We started making some changes in that direction, and now we're trying to move things online. But yes, as Sandeep said, it's a difficult time to meet the cultural space right now. But look, culture is a generation long thing. 6 months should not trouble you too much.
Right.
So yes, we have to engage a lot more with the native British. Then that means that we have to understand how to communicate, right? Because if we don't do that, then they will capture it, right? I mean, pranayam will become cardiac coherence breathing. I don't know if you know that Lancet had come up with an article. What do you mean cardiac coherence breathing? It's pranayam, sala. Or haldi doodh will become turmeric latte.
Latte.
It's haldi doodh, boss. We know it's good for health. We don't need someone to call it turmeric latte and market it to us, right? But we have to speak of it ourselves. And one of the key things in that, I realized that with Westerners, the language itself, I'm not talking about English, the method of communication, it has to be much more relaxed, much more casual. So I notice we tend to get, perhaps a fault of some old habits in the bureaucracy, this thing, that our language is a little too formal. We are not, open, relaxed, casual enough. We have to do that. A. B. I realize in the West, they privilege documents over oral culture, right? And they assume that if there's a culture which privileges oral culture, they just assume there must be no documentation, which is a lot of bullshit actually, right? There is a lovely Sanskrit line in India, Shastrat Rudhir Bhalyasi, that folk culture is more important than the text, right? Which is why folk culture is given so much respect in our Indian traditions. But that doesn't mean that the texts don't exist. The National Mission of Manuscript has collated handwritten, palm leaf manuscripts, which is in a way a metric of the knowledge production of an ancient culture. India, the National Manuscript Mission has tabulated as of now around 3 to 3.5 million handwritten manuscripts. That's more than the rest of the ancient world combined.
Right, yeah.
Ancient Greece, which is the mother culture of Europe, has between 20 to 30,000 manuscripts. That's it. That's a damn good number by itself. Compared to India, it's nothing, right? We have enough documentation and these aren't just, you can't have 3 million religious texts, right? So they are musical texts, literature, scientific, physics, chemistry. We Indians, first of all, we're a bunch of morons because we haven't analyzed, translated, studied these texts, right?
Correct.
But a part of it was also we simply didn't have the resources. Look, people didn't have food, they didn't have toilets at home here. So who's going to take up the project of digitizing and translating 3.5 million manuscripts? It's more than the rest of the world combined. It's a massive, gigantic task. But now we are getting the money for it. Okay, so now we have to start this. And I realized that the Western world, it privileges texts, right, as compared to oral culture. Whereas in India, we have texts, but we privilege oral culture above the text, right? There is a benefit to this culture. I won't go into that right now. But I realized that for the West, we actually need to, it's for our own heritage as well. We should do it for our own good, but it'll certainly help in communication to the West. When they see our Ayurveda theories backed up by texts which are there. The Boer manuscripts are there. There are enough things to show a scientific basis. Ayurveda is not homeopathy here. There's actually science behind it, right? But we need to study and communicate that. Otherwise, the West does not take it seriously. So that's stuff that's in our hands. And now we have the money. So we should do it.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think, I want to pick on the one, many points that you made, but the one that really struck me as probably relevant because it crosses the need of just, let's say, the UK or the West, is the new sort of language that one needs to sort of use to communicate. Because, interestingly, I find when you talk to the young people in India, it is not very different in some senses, probably because they're products in some senses of some of that culture washing here. And therefore, there is a certain formality to our, to how we take our stuff in. Maybe we the reverence we have for what we have sort of translates into a little bit of maybe stuff when you communicate. So I want to dwell a little bit further on that, on literature, and I'll come back to the same question with Sandeep. On literature, when we communicate, do you sense a need for us? Have we made some changes in the past, or do you sense a need for us to change to address this particular point when we are addressing newer audiences?
I think specifically on literature, we have two issues. One, most of the book, there's not a reflection on those authors. I love many of those books as a reader, but many of the books that are called Indian writing in the West, they're not really Indian writing. It's an exotic, westernized Indian take on India. It's a Potemkin version, let's be honest.
Sure.
And that writing could very well have been written by a Gora also. Because when you read those books, if you're an Indian from rooted India, when you read those books, you're like, ye kya baat kar raha hai? And you'll still enjoy it. But you know that actually they have no idea about the real India. It's just perhaps a South Mumbai, Lutyens Delhi impression of what India is, right?
Sure.
And most Westerners read those books and think that is India, right? That is one issue, because it's frankly not the real India. The other issue is they see Bollywood, which is completely on the other extreme, which is completely fantastical, and they assume Indians are, just dancing on the roads and breaking, breaking into a song, which is also not, we love our dance, we love our music, but I mean, we're not suddenly going to get out of the car in the middle of a traffic jam and start dancing and singing. No, we don't do that, right? So you're stuck between these two things where the real India actually doesn't get communicated. The real India, I sense, is more in the kind of literature that is written in Indian languages, right? And perhaps now slowly it's coming into English as well. Those of us Indians who are actually not from that elite background, and our parents may have studied in the Hindi language medium, Malayalam medium, whatever, but have forced us into English because, look, they wanted us to get good jobs, right? So our attitudes are Indian, sensibility is completely Indian, but we are comfortable with English. This is probably for the first time, I think, that you have real India speaking in English. Okay, some of which will be good, some of which will not be good, which is true of any genre. This real India has to be communicated to Westerners, right? And one of the things I strongly believe in today's day, don't pretend to be something that you're not, especially in this day of social media, open, transparent communication. Don't do that, right? Be who you are. Some people will like you, some people will not like you, right? But be who you are. Don't pretend to be something that you're not, right? You can modify your style of communication, right? That you will not break too much into Sanskrit or into Hindi. Most of us Indians, we have that, it's almost instinctive, especially if we are in India. We speak in a khichdi. We keep breaking into Hindi and often, or whatever our own languages. And often it's less English and more Hindi. Okay. But when you're abroad, you have to consciously try and control it. What that does is you start thinking in English, right? Most of us think in Hindi and then translate into English, which is why often our English sounds funny, right? Because we think in Hindi and translate into English. So if we can try and control that just how we communicate, that in words, language that the Westerners can understand, then just present who we are, man. I genuinely believe the real India actually has something to say to the West. And I think they will like us. But we should present who we are, the real India. Okay. That's the way I see it. I think it's going to grow. I think it's going to grow more and more. I find, I've engaged with many second, third generation Indians in the UK. I get very excited when I meet them, yeah, because it's wonderful how many of them have managed to hold on to their culture, right? They're deeply embedded, but they have a British, sensibility as well. So they really can be a living bridge.
Bridge between.
Yeah, because the roots are deeply Indian, but there is a Western sensibility, so they'll be able to, to communicate.
Okay.
And they'll not always. I know I've met some parents who get upset, that my children, they are not, following our culture, and they are dating Westerners, and things like that. Which I think, boss, you have to have faith in our next generation. We are the only Bronze Age culture that is still alive. Our culture is not going to die so easily. Have faith in them, right? And for all you know, they may come up with a wonderful way of communicating our core values to Westerners. So that's what I want to write to the Nehru Center.
Right, wonderful. I think that's in a sense a pretty good, strong, real statement for the Nehru Center. And let me sort of take that same point to Sandeep. Sandeep, now this is an interesting point, right? There is a real India, and there is a sort of language that the West understands. So if you can combine real India, as Amish says, with the language that the West understands, you probably have a sort of a killer product. Now, in your area, which is Indian classical music, the fact of the matter is there is a lot of sort of weight of history, shall I say, that sits with it. So do you see that as a challenge? Do you see that ability to, bring out the real India or the current India is kind of muddled a little bit because, you have to be truthful or sort of more, in line with what's been there in the past?
Yeah, I think Amish has sort of set the scene really well. And I think for Darbar, from our experience and what I've witnessed as growing up, so you talk about the Western sensibility and then still being cultural. I mean, I came to this country when I was 10. And before I came to this country, my dad made me tie my turban. So, as a Sikh, I have an identity I cannot deny. Wherever I go, I'm carrying my identity around. I can't hide behind that. So my sisters could go out there. Everyone will think they're Italian, they're Spanish, whatever it is. But for the men, we have an identity that we can't deny. So the starting point really for me was what were we used to? So going to Michael Jackson, going to all these Western classical, Western pop concerts, and then going to Western art venues. Just observing how they do things, looking at how do they present their marketing material? What is the language that they're using for their marketing material? How is it that they present you? What is the experience you have of going into an art gallery? What do you visualize? How do you perceive that? I looked at all of that. I observed all of that, and then I compared it to the Indian culture. You'd go to an Indian thing, things weren't hung properly. It wasn't advertised correctly. The language was very different. Concerts never started on time, never finished on time. The PA never really worked properly. It was like whatever, it was like blowing or whatever. So that was kind of the scene. The person who started the first high quality stuff was Jay Vishwadeva. Just by the very nature, he was working in the big event. And for me, I decided that not out of disrespect or to any of our Indian venues or anything like that, because we still work with them, we still partner with them, but we wanted to be in world-class venues. And so from day one, our internal motto was about remarketing and rebranding Indian classical music. So what does that mean? So that means when you, I'll compare it to an experience I had once when I went to Survive Festival in Pune. So I kept on writing to them saying, can you just give me the lineup and the dates? and I needed to book my
Mm.
flight, and they wouldn't give me the dates, they wouldn't give me anything. And then finally, I just said to my wife that let's just book the dates and let's just go, and then we'll see what happens. And then I think a week before, they announced the lineup. Here, we have to announce the lineup 1 year in advance. So that is the difference. So there are massive cultural differences between what you can do there in India and what you can do here. Then in India, you just write down the names of artists and that's it. You do one flyer, all the dates on the left-hand side, put the names on, and that's it. There's no way in the UK you are going to sell any tickets on that basis. So the requirements from us became really quite difficult. We had to bring out really high quality images. We had to really rewrite and think about the experience. Now, this is what Amish is talking about. If, say, you've got, let's just say you've got an artist, there's no point you talking about this artist, male or female, and saying, this is her guru, this is her gharana, this is what it is. Because the West, when they read it, they have no idea what it is. So we had to turn the whole language into an experiential thing, that by coming to this sitar concert, this is what you will experience, this is what you will engage in. So you had to do all of that. Then you had to sort of think about how are you not only looking at the marketing, what is the walkthrough again? What is the experience of an audience member from the time they come into, say, the South Bank Centre or the Barbican Centre in London? What is it that they're going to experience? Now, that you had to do from an Indian perspective and a Western perspective. And because we started our concerts on time, if we were late by 5 minutes, our audiences would let us know that, you know, by the way, you started 5 minutes late, you know. And so we started our concerts on time and we finished them on time. So that whole thing about drilling through with your artist, no, this is not flexible. I know you're doing improvised. Yeah, nature lega. You have to finish at 10:30, and I want the last da on that, on that time, you know. So it was an element of kind of the marketing, but also then what we had to do was we had to really think hard about the lighting, the sound, the tech side of it. What is the experience you're going to get from that? How are you doing your presentations? No one's paid money to listen to you stand on the stage and waffle on. Yeah, you've come there, you want the music. And you allow the music to do it. Now, the complexity we also have, like Amish said, is that our tradition is oral. Now, I can't write a program in advance because I don't know what rag someone's going to perform. Yeah, all I can talk about is the art form that, yes, typically, you know, Indian classical music, you might have a lap, jor jhala, and then gat or whatever you have, and there's a structure to it. That's all we could write. The rest of it, we couldn't really do much more on, and we just had to allow people to know in the audience when we did the introductions that, listen, there's a slight difference between our music and the Western classical music. In the Western classical music, you turn up, you cannot breathe, you cannot cough, you have to sit still, you cannot applause, and which is completely diametrically opposite to what we're used to. We want kya baat, vava. Yeah, you know, and that whole gesture thing with the hands and everything from the audience is what you feed off, and that is how we interact in our tradition. So we have to sometimes say, please, when you feel like clapping, please clap, right? If you want to learn the word wah, just say wah, you know?
Yeah.
So there's education on both sides, but over the years we've seen because we started off in a small theater of just 300 or something, and now we go up to sort of 3,000 seater venues. We've seen our audiences decline from 80% Asian to at least 50% Asian. So it's a lot about the experiential thing. It's a lot about redoing the way we do things in a way that the West would expect it to be done in.
No, if I can add something to what Sandeep was saying, it's, you know, our approach to classical music in a way shows the fundamental difference between the Indian and the Western way. You know, so in Western classical music, the classical music is written down, right?
Yeah.
And you believe that an orchestra has performed it well when they get it as close to the original composition of the composer. That's a concept. And like I was saying, you know, that whatever is written is privileged, right? As in Indian classical music, both Hindustani and Carnatic, it's not that texts don't exist. Of course, they're there from some way the times, right? The texts exist, but the way our classical music is done is that a raga will have sort of boundaries set up, right? That this is the broad approach you can have. Now the gharana that the artist is from, the artist himself or herself, the mood of that day, the audience, that will define how the artist interprets it, right? And he or she will feed off the audience, feed off his or her own mood, and then create the music. So even if you have the same artist, same gharana, same rag, what you hear that evening or that morning is unique, because that same raga, same artist, same gharana, just 2 months later could be something could be something quite different, because it will depend on the mood of the artist, the audience. And I think Sandeep does. Sandeep, I'm so sorry. I've been here only a few months, so I've never been to a darbar. But when it happens, I'm certainly going to want to come, because a large part of this is actually explaining our culture to the Westerners. And one of the things I find, I really think Westerners are open to, in some ways, they're really open. They're open to experiencing different things. So if we can immerse them in our culture, that this approach itself is fundamentally different, right? Immerse yourself in this culture and then enjoy it, right? I think what Sandeep said is so wonderful, what he's doing with his audience, that say Baba, enjoy it, clap, because that actually feeds into the artist, right? And then the artist's performance becomes that much superior, for that. Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, because essentially what you're saying is that while we have to learn their language, at least as far as music and the classical arts are concerned, there's equally a game of getting them to learn our language.
Exactly, and it's up to us, and it's up to us to immerse them in our culture, and that's what Sandeep is doing such a wonderful job with Darbar on this, and that's what we have to do. We have to try and immerse them into our way, but we can't expect them to move completely into our way.
Yeah.
So we have to move a bit as well. We have to try and explain it in a manner that they can understand. But let's not become a Potemkin version. That what I was saying earlier about the kind of Indian writer books that are thought Indian writing in the West. They're not really real India. We read that, we know this is not real India, right? That's a Potemkin version. So we have to make sure that we keep it real, but let's communicate it in a way that Westerners can at least immerse themselves.
Great. So it's
Sandeep, I have to come to Darbar. I have to. The next
You're
one.
Please come.
So we've covered a lot of ground, and I want to sort of quickly close now with just one point. And this has been on my mind ever since I heard that we've been thinking about UK. I see UK, and I don't know, and I think a lot of people see UK in two distinct parts. There is UK, and then there is this whole big world called London, which is in many ways, for those of us who go regularly, it's a different world in a sense from the UK. So how do you manage that dichotomy? Is there a dichotomy, first of all? And is there something that we can do about, do we need to do something different between London and the rest of the UK? Either of you start.
I think it's a really good question, Hari, because we've recently been absorbed in this whole thing called Brexit, and you can see the difference between London as being one of the great capital cities of the world and the rest of the country. The rest of the country voted to leave, and London voted to remain. So that kind of shows you the difference between London and the rest of it. And Londoners were so upset, they said, you might as well just put a fence around us and leave us alone, and you lot can do what you want. If you don't want to be part of Europe, then don't be part of Europe. So it was quite a hard viewpoint that Londoners took, because London is hugely cosmopolitan. The difference between us and the rest of the country is absolutely huge. And the festival started in Leicester, which is about 100 miles north of London, where my father was teaching for 22 years. But we realized within 3 years that if we kept the festival in Leicester, it would die because we could not get commercial traction on it. So that we brought the festival down to the South Bank Centre, which is one of the greatest venues in the world as an arts venue. So in short, there is a massive difference between London and being anywhere else in the country. So that's been my experience. But at the same time, it's important that organizations like the Bar partner with other organizations like, say, for example, Gem Arts, which is based in Newcastle, 400 miles away, that, you know, we make sure that when our artists come, they can travel up by train 3.5 hours, and then they're in Newcastle, they can perform there. And now one of the challenges we have is to connect up with the 10 NPOs and then start looking at how we're going to share. Because if the economy takes a dive, which the figures show that the UK economy has shrunk by 20% because of COVID, the biggest drop in 25 years ever, it will be really important that if we're going to hold on to our culture, that all the arts organizations get together and start sharing how we work. So this whole thing about London and the rest of England is very important. And at the moment, the Arts Council of England is really supporting everything out of London, because the cost of contribution from the Arts Council to Londoners is much heavier. But the comparison between London and the rest of the country cannot be made. You've got a global city versus the rest of the township. And that's no disrespect to the other cities in England.
Right. Amish, any thought on this?
Yeah, you know, I've been here a few months, you know, so I hear what Sandeep is saying. You know, and in the little time I've been here, one can't deny many of the things that he said. But, you know, in a typical Indian way, can we find a middle ground? You know, can we find some way to carry everyone along? That would be my thought. You know, I'm a diplomat. I never speak on politics in any case, and now even more so because I'm a diplomat. So I won't comment on the politics of it. But one of the things that's clearly happening is one sees a disconnect in the rest of the UK and London. And I feel that in our own small way, because you know, UK's success is the success. In UK's success is the success of everyone here, including the Indian community here. So I would feel that you know, we should engage with outside London as well. And in fact, that's one of the programs I had wanted to take up. Again, COVID has put some brakes on that, because Nehru Centre is very London driven. So one of the thoughts I had is, why can't we form partnerships, right, with cultural centers in Birmingham, Manchester, Edinburgh, Belfast, everywhere, right? And we'll be happy to share our programming. Any artists who come out here, send it to them, share branding. You know, if it's online, then, you know, then we can promote their events to our database, our events to their database. So essentially work across the country, become a cultural center for the UK, not a cultural center for London. I certainly want to drive this. You know, and one has already spoken to a few cultural centers that can we have a partnership. I mean, what Sandeep said is absolutely right. There's going to be a budget cutback across all cultural centers. So actually, it is in our selfish interest to find ways to barter and partner. Right? We have to make the same infrastructure work better. So not only will this make cultural sense, it will make economic sense as well. And it also fits into our intrinsic Indian attitude. There's a reason why the Indian community doesn't cause trouble as immigrants in most countries in the world, not just in the UK. There's a reason why Indians are normally a net addition to whichever country they immigrate to, economically, educationally, in every way. Because our attitude fundamentally comes with this thing of, how do we find the middle ground? How do we take, it's a very Indian thing, right? So if there is some middle ground possible, of course we'll work with London, but we'll work with you know, the Brits outside London as well. It'll be good for us. It'll be good for the UK as well.
Great. Sandeep, Amish, thanks a lot for taking the time out. It's been a wonderful conversation. I think we've covered enormous ground, and it's been wonderful to hear fairly distinct viewpoints, I would say. The big takeaways that I take away from this conversation are, one is that, it is tough times, and therefore the whole area of trying to promote art and literature and culture in broadly is going to come under pressure. And innovative thinking and probably finding a middle path and so on and so forth is really the way forward. It's one big sort of message that I'm getting. The other, of course, is that whatever we're going to do, we have a very strong base to leverage, but there is a significant sort of co-opting by the West that's going on, and therefore it's in our interest to sort of understand that, work with that, and possibly to some extent overcome that and continue to retain our identity within this whole large journey process, which is not at all something to be ignored or even evaluated. It's very powerful stuff, and we should love it, and we should actually do more with it. Once again, thanks a lot. It's been wonderful having both of you.
Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank
We
you.
have a couple of questions here.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Aparna, you want to just read the questions out, please?
Yeah, namaste. This is probably for both of you, and it's probably coming from a very concerned Indian artist. I'll just read out their message. It is apparent that the best of Indian art, dance, music, theatre does not generally get showcased in various forums abroad, especially when it is sponsored by the government, where, within quotes, lobbying, influence, and proximity to the national capital plays a big role. Western audiences, apart from global centers like in London, New York, etc., particularly in lesser known countries all over the world, get to see what is a watered down version and poor performances that does not reflect Indian art and culture with all its brilliance and beauty. How do you tackle this challenge to ensure that your audience really sees the best of India whenever it is presented to your audiences? I think it's a question about curation and quality. How do we assess quality in something like the arts?
I'll have a go at answering
Sure.
this question. So I think one of the big things is that because we are away from India, we're not connected directly with the government, and we're not supported by the government. We do work with the ICCR, but we work with them in a very limited way. And the reason for that is what we do is we curate first, and then we see, are any of the artists impaneled and will the ICCR support us? If they do, they're well and good. If they don't, fine. The challenge would be if you went to the ICCR website, then curated from their website just on the basis of who is impaneled, I think that would become a very difficult thing. So that's one problem. So we make sure that we're not connected with any Ustad, Pandit, or anyone like that. So we keep our freedom, and we don't curate by committee. So in particularly in Darbar, it's my head is on the neck. If I get it wrong, then everyone can blame me. And I've told my trustees that the day I get it wrong and I do it consistently wrong, please get rid of me and find someone better. Yeah. I would also say one other thing. Over the years, artists have come to the UK and underperformed. They've underperformed in the sense they know that the audience isn't as solid as what they are in, say, for example, Calcutta or Chennai or Pune. So what they do is they come here, they do a concert, perform at 70% of their ability, do well, still get a standing ovation, still everyone's going wah wah, kya baat and everything, and then go home. With us, what's happened is we have a requirement that every artist stays for the entire festival as part of the family. And what Amish said is really important, that this is a holistic art form. It's up to us to look after the well-being of the artists whilst they're here in the UK. Now, if they're upset over anything, yeah, whether it's food, whether it's the venue, whether they've had some bad experience, I have to make sure that they're in a really good state, they're really happy, they've got this positive environment. And then when they go on the stage, they see the front row is actually full of artists. You're not going to play at 70% when you've got all the artists in front of you. You're going to be, thinking twice about how you're going to play. So what happens is you bring up the standard. So that whole thing about the question about compromise is a very, very good one. It's a very tricky one. And then we have an ethical framework of how we curate in terms of looking after accompaniment artists, that they're paid separately, they're contracted separately. Also looking at the ratio of women and men, and making sure that we are upholding a platform for women within the festival. So these are all things that we have to do, and you have to work twice as hard when you're outside of India. At the same time, I just want to make this point because someone brought it up as a question. I saw it on the thing. We can never compare what India does. India is mother home, is our motherland. It works in a unique way. It works in organized chaos, and it's fantastic. And we just cannot beat that. We can talk about the world-class venues in London, but for me, when I go to the Chennai December season, and then you've got all the suburbs doing their concerts, and you're in some suburb with 3,000 people, the fans are whirring away, the mossis are at your feet, you know, but then someone sings for 3 hours. You just cannot beat that experience. So the thing is, you have the Kumbh Mela, no one can fathom that. No one can fathom the Chennai festival. So the scale of what India does and how it works is just spiritually magical. But what we have to do is still somehow try and do it in our own way with our UK sensibilities and try and make it work. Hopefully that answers the question.
Could Amish, could you please respond on behalf of ICC? Yeah.
So, look, you know, I think what Sandeep has said is very valid. And there are two things that I would add to this. There are many authors, you know, let me just try and explain this from a writing perspective. There are many authors, because I read in Hindi as well, right? I read, and I read translations of Kannada, Tamil, Bengali texts into Hindi or English. And there are many authors who are utterly wonderful in Indian languages. But at some level, you know, they will not carry into the UK, right? There are some authors who are fantastic, but you know it will carry into the UK as well. You know, what we were speaking about earlier is it is a different market, a different sensibility, right? And for something to succeed here, it has to be Indian, but it must work in the Western paradigm as well. You know, so like just to give you an example that we Indians will understand, pure Chinese food will never work in India, right? Because first of all, Indians will not eat bats, right? But sorry, bad joke. But pure Chinese food, that flavor will simply not appeal, right? So the core can be Chinese, but it has to be Indianized in some way for it to work in India. And that's because that's a culture of India. And similarly, the way one sees it, if we are in the UK or in the West, one has to respect the native culture as well. So we have to present our culture, our artists, in a way that can appeal to the West as well. That's one factor to bear into mind. The second point that was said of there being fairness and transparency on how artists are empaneled and selected, that is something that that feedback is well taken. You know, and I can say that many parts, the bureaucracy is trying to bring that in. Like, I'm sure you're aware in the Padma Awards process, where earlier it was, you know, there was no process. Now there is a lot of transparency because it's online on the website. Anyone can nominate. The documentation is there. And therefore you find what is happening in the Padma Award process also is that many people who would never have got recognized, say 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the only people who would get recognized are those in the eye of people who are in Delhi. You know, it's fair and that was unfair to the rest of India. But now the Padma Award process is such that people in Delhi, once the Padma Awards are announced, people in Delhi have to Google to find out who is this person, right? Because it's much more open, much more transparent. There is a discussion, yes, this has to be done in all spheres. It's just that one has to realize the scale of India means that things take time. There are more people in India, and I'm not a bureaucrat. I'm not trying to defend the bureaucracy, right? You know, I'm essentially a private guy. I'm here for 3 years and then I leave. I'm not planning on becoming a lifelong bureaucrat. So I'm not defending the bureaucracy, but one has to just appreciate that the scale of India is such. There are more people in India than all of North America, all of Europe, all of Middle East combined. We have more languages than all these regions combined. We have more cuisines than all these regions combined. We are more a continent than a country. So just implementing this, it takes time. It is very well taken, but I think some improvements have been made in the paneling process, but the work is on. It is something that is understood. I appreciate that.
There are two people with their hands raised. Will you let them in and allow them to ask the question, please?
Yeah, Mr. Vaidyanath can talk now.
You have to unmute him.
Yeah, I've unmuted him.
Vidyanath Jha, no. Mr. Vidyanath Jha. Mr. Vidyanath Jha. Well, I guess he's.
No, he's unmuted himself.
Maybe his question. Oh, yeah, okay, he's unmuted himself. Sir, can you ask your question? Mr. Vidyanath Jha?
Yes, it was my first experience to be with you people, and I really appreciate the endeavor. I had not known about it earlier. I am a college teacher right now, heading a college as principal. So I very much appreciate the efforts that are being made by you people. No question from my side.
Thank you so much, sir. So I think we don't have any other questions.
We do have two questions on the Q&A box. There's one from Mr. Ganesh Mani and one from Mrs. Rashma NK.
Yeah, you just want to read it out to whoever it's addressed?
It's addressed to both of them. So the first question from Mr. Ganesh Mani is, with arguably US soft power waning, this is an opportunity for incredible India. No democracy is perfect, but how do we nudge things there with respect to what could be improved? Example, Hindu-Muslim relations to enhance soft power credibly. Your thoughts, please.
Should I?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I would, firstly, I'm not so sure American soft power will decline inexorably. And speaking as someone who is a Democrat and a liberal, I would like democracies to do well. US, UK, for the good of the world, I would like democracies to do well. No democracy is perfect, but it certainly is a far better way, paraphrasing Winston Churchill, it is a far better way to run any country as compared to any other system. And as far as India is concerned, I don't think we should focus on Hindu-Muslim relations just because we want to improve our soft power. We should focus on it because it's the right thing to do, right? And it is the Indian thing to do. And I would think that there are extremists in every group in India, but a vast majority of Indians in all communities are fundamentally centrist, deeply religious, but liberal as well. And by liberal, I don't mean being westernized or being leftist. By liberal, I mean the ability to accept different truths, the ability to get along with someone who may be different. And a vast majority of Indians are like that, which is why you find that India is not like other, you might find a few incidents, but largely India is peaceful. On a per capita basis, we have among the lowest violent crimes anywhere in the world on a per capita basis. Remember again what I said about the scale of India, right? So don't look at total number, look at the per capita basis. The probability of an Indian spending his entire life without being in hospital suffering from a violent crime is actually quite high, right, as compared to most other countries in the world. But that's not to say that problems don't exist. There is a problem and we should focus on it because it's the Indian thing to do, not because of soft power. And lastly, in terms of Indian soft power growing, I would think, as I had said in my first answer, as our hard power rises, that's going to rise along, soft power will rise along with it in any case. But yes, all of us Indians who are artists, who are in this place, can play a role to make it grow faster. Sandeep is doing a wonderful job in the UK. Vijay Lakshmi ji has put this conference together. Her institute itself drives this, the center. So all of us have to play our role to build it. And I think India and our culture and our soft power can actually add a lot of value to the world.
So I think we have come to the end of our time here. So there are a couple questions that maybe we could, do with you later, and it would come out in an interview. So I thank both of you very much, and I thank Hari, and it was really nice. And I guess we've all learned a lot through this. And we look forward to engaging with you again, and we'll definitely reach out to you for more events like this. Thank you very much. Namaskar and Shubh Sandhya.
Thank you, Vijay Lakshmi ji. Thank you.
Namaskar.